So our webinar today is on top tips for the SATs spelling paper. My name's Amelia and I'm going to be going through a bit of a breakdown of the SATs paper to start with, and then I'm going to hand over to Amanda, who's going to go through the top tips at the end of the webinar as well. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions or to tell us what you think about any of the parts. So when is the SATs spelling paper? Well, both paper 1 and paper 2 of the SPAG is on Monday the 12th of May this year, so it's on the first day. You've got paper 1, which is your grammar and punctuation focus, although it's not always completely clear cut and things that are spelling do overlap, but that basically talks about like the Appendix 2 things in the curriculum. Paper 2 is what we're focusing on today in this webinar, and that is the spelling, and that will be mainly Appendix 1 of the curriculum that's covered in that assessment there. So there isn't a time limit with the spelling assessment as well, which is quite nice. So here we've got our model that shows what makes or what goes into a good speller. So you've got all this linguistic knowledge, the phonics, the orthography, the morphology, and the etymology, which you need to process to be able to apply to spelling. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about this in detail, you can have a look at some of our other webinars. We have one called What Makes an Effective Speller, which would be really good to have a look at. The more times children go through this process from the phonics, the orthography, morphology and etymology and getting that into spelling, they will build up a bank of memorised words, which is their lexical store. So it's kind of like your visual memory. So this is where, when we've got orthographic mapping. So orthographic mapping is the cognitive process where we're associating speech sounds with written letters for an immediate retrieval on the site. And this is what the spelling paper of the SATs is trying to test. Can children immediately retrieve these speech sound written letter associations on site? So this specific quote was talking about reading, but it does also apply for spelling too. So the spelling Appendix 1 has lots of information in it, and it does say that there's some bits of it that are statutory, and then there's some bits that are non-statutory, but they are guidance for you. So here is an example with the year 3 and 4. So you've got spelling work for years 3 and 4. At the top, it does say revision of work from years 1 and 2, paying special attention to the rules for adding suffixes. So that is really important to bear in mind. Don't just skip that bit because it's not a list of objectives. We do need to make sure that Key Stage 1 content is secure. Then under there, you've got new work for years 3 and 4. The statutory requirements column gives you lots of patterns. For example, adding suffixes beginning with a vowel, with vowel letters to words of more than one syllable. And then it gives you, to the right of that, non-statutory guidance and some example non-statutory words. Then at the end of that section, you'll have a word list for years 3 and 4 as well. And this is the other way around. This is a statutory list of words. And then at the bottom of that, it gives you some non-statutory guidance for how you could approach those words. So it does suggest all the morphology, etymology, and phonics approaches for addressing these words on the word list as well. So I'm starting with that because we are going to go and have a look at what words are in the actual spelling papers from the last few years. So here I've got a grid from 2018 papers to 2024 papers, just showing a brief overview of where they have come from. So we've got a lot of the words are not actually necessarily year 5 and 6 words. It is across the key stage, and you do get a few creeping in from key stage 1 as well. Those key stage 1 ones are usually recapped in some form in the year 3 and 4 patterns, but they are first taught in key stage 1, so that's why I identified them as there. You can see, for example, if I look at 2024 and then the year 3 and 4 pattern, I've got a number 8, and then in brackets I've got 4. So the number 8 is how many words there were of a year 3 and 4 pattern from that appendix, but 4 of them were actually examples from the statutory word list. So only 50% of the words they used with a year 3 and 4 pattern were actually one of the examples that they gave. 4 of those words were linked to the pattern, but a completely different word to what they give in the examples. In the box below that, you can see year 3 and 4 statutory, so that's off the statutory word list instead. I've got a 1, and then I've got the little triangle up symbol. All that means is that pattern is first taught then as a statutory word, but it's also taught in year 5 and 6 as a pattern as well. So it's recapped in a way there. So this, the last year's paper had 1 that was on the statutory 3-4 list, but also taught in 5-6 as a pattern, and another word off the statutory list that wasn't retaught as a pattern. The year 5 and 6 patterns, you had 6 words that were of a pattern, and only 2 of them were from the examples, and there were 3 year 5 and 6 statutory words, which was actually the most we've had in the last 5 years of papers. Often there is actually 0 from the year 5 and 6 list. So just looking at 2024 words in a little bit more detail, I've got all 20 words on here. I've got this little code in the top right corner for you. So NSE in brackets means non-statutory example from the curriculum. So I've tried to highlight where those are so that we can see how often they are using the examples that they give in the curriculum and how often they are just using the same pattern but a different word. So a lot of the patterns are year 3 and 4 based, like we pointed out on the previous slide. Sometimes there are overlaps. So for example, island, the second word, is a year 3 and 4 statutory word, but it is also in year 5 and 6 with the pattern of silent letters, and it is a non-statutory example there as well. Famous also on the statutory word list and as part of a pattern in year 3 and 4. Social, year 5 and 6 do teach the pattern CIAL, but antisocial is a non-statutory example that is used for the year 3 and 4 anti-prefix, so they will have seen that word before, hopefully. You've got some words in here as well where they're combining lots of patterns. So replacing is a year 3 and 4 pattern of the prefix re, a year 2 pattern with the soft C, and you're adding ing to words ending in E. So there's a lot of skills to draw on there. Some of them are a little bit more simple, just off a statutory word list. And I'm going to go through comparing this year's words to some of the previous years. So here are the 20 words that are used in the spelling paper from 2023, 2024 and 2022 as well. So I just started to spot some patterns that come up in each of them, and the first one I saw was that they often use this OU representing the sound once in each paper from what's happened over the previous years. We also sometimes get some OU-GH patterns and the different pronunciations that it represents. There wasn't actually one in 2024, so I wouldn't be surprised if we get one of those this year. Also, scenic and scenario are linked with that SC representing the sound. That pattern seemed to come up quite a lot, although again wasn't in the 2024 directly, but they did have replacing with the C representing the soft sound. So just going back to that SC one here, this is where the pattern is in the year 5 and 6, and you can see the examples it's given, and they're not the ones that were used in the past papers for those 3 years. So it might be one of those, it might be something along the same lines though as well. Here again, the yellow ones, I've got URE identified, either TURE or SURE seems to pop up at least once per paper. Y representing the I sound, so syrup and lyrics were just linked to the pattern, but symbol was actually off the statutory 5 and 6 list as well as being linked to that pattern. And the endings GUE and QUE in the blue were in 2023 and 2024, and there's QUE at the beginning of the word Q has also been used there. Suffixes are a big part of our language always, and they feature quite heavily in the spelling paper assessments as well. Here I've identified in orange the OUS suffixes, which is sometimes just OUS. Sometimes you've got IOUS, and sometimes it's the TIOUS with these shus as well. So they tend to pop up approximately once per paper. But then the rest, the ones in yellow, are all your shuns and your shulls that are showing up in their various forms. So they are quite popular patterns to be used in the spelling paper. And on here, another one that seems to pop up about once per paper is one representation of the A sound, but with an E in the spelling. So veins in 2024, obey in 23, and in 22 it was survey as well. Sometimes I like to throw in one of those silent letter ones. So we've got island and lamb there, although there wasn't one specifically in 2022. And here I've highlighted homophones as well that tend to come up about once per paper. Q is taught as a statutory word in the 5 and 6 list, but current and band are homophones, which is why they're there, but they weren't actually the ones in the non-statutory examples. So if you'd have just learned those non-statutory examples, you wouldn't have covered these ones specifically. Here, these words with silent letters, so we said we've got island and lamb, they are both actually off the example list. So it could well be that we're going to see something else out of that little examples box there. And I think this is my final one for breakdown. We've got the yellow here showing CH representing K, or in machine it's representing the sh there. So the K one has popped up once each paper, and the sh with machine hasn't been seen since 2022. I think some of the ones they pick for that pattern are usually the most challenging. So chaos, not given as an example, and quite a tricky spelling with that CH representing the K. And with machine, again, you've got that INE at the end, which is quite tricky as well with the exceptions in the GBCs. The ly suffix, either as ILY or just ly, seems to pop up about once per paper as well. And the final thing in blue is that often you find that they are combining a lot of the patterns. So replacing, you've got prefix and suffix, undrinkable, again, prefix and suffix, and disrespect, you've got 2 prefixes on there. So you've got lots of things going on where you're combining different patterns that we're using. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Amanda now so that she can go through our top tips.
Thank you. Okay, so tip 1 is to don't suddenly change your practice. Okay, keep practicing spellings in research-proven ways. That can be with our Conan boxes, sound buttons, or syllable breaks. Getting the children to analyse and break down the words in these ways can be really, really helpful. It also can help, if you pop on the next page, Amelia, teaching the children to spell in general, not just focusing specifically on a word, to look at the pattern. So for example, if you look at option A, if they're struggling with the word happily, if we tell them happily is HAPPILY, yes, it helps them to spell that individual word, but we can actually teach them to spell in general, looking at the pattern. So for example, we could say when the base word ends in a Y, so happy, for example, this normally changes to an I when adding many suffixes like ly. So suddenly you're opening them up to a whole host of other spellings. Instead of just giving them that individual spelling that can help them in that instance, you're opening them up to help them with apply that pattern to many other words. Tip 2, remember SAT is an end of key stage assessments. Like Amelia said, don't get too caught up in just focusing in on your 5 and 6 statutory or your year 6 patterns, because it is an end of key stage assessments. It will have patterns from other year groups in there. So going back and revisiting some of those patterns, if they're weaker at those or you've got extra time, can be really, really helpful for the children. So test experience, have a practice test in a similar style to the real one. Obviously, we don't want to overdo it and test and only test. it is like doing a bit of a mock driving test, isn't it? You need to practice it in order to prepare them for the real one, and make sure it's in a similar style so that they can actually apply it to their SATs test. But obviously we don't want to test to teach them. That's not the point of the test. Okay, so the development of spelling skills is not merely a matter of memorizing word lists by rote. We don't just want them to memorize word lists. We're looking at the patterns. The purpose of the tests is to practice the test format and to assess the children in an out of and an in context format. Okay, they don't actually teach spelling. So please don't just give them loads of tests in order to practice or in order to learn the spellings. Like we've said in test tip 1, don't just good practice is still good practice. Don't change what you're doing already. You want to teach them the spellings and just use tests in order to practice that format for them. Tip 4, help children choose varied, effective practice methods that suit them. Okay, so don't let practice get stale. You want to mix it up a bit. We have obviously a variety of games on the Spelling Shed site if you do want to go down that route. We've also got various things you can use, syllable breaks, phonemes, word mapping, and putting children into closed sentence activities, but make it more appealing to the children and helps the children with their keenness to learn it as well. Tip 5, teach the children skills for managing test anxiety. Obviously, some children will have more anxiety than others when it comes to tests. So practice deep breathing exercises, make sure they're eating healthily, getting enough sleep, exercising, and let them know mistakes are okay. Obviously, no one likes to make mistakes. We all like to be perfect as much as we can be, but letting them know that mistakes are okay, and obviously the practice can help with that, making sure they're practiced and ready for it when it comes time for the actual test. Tip 6, to do a variety of patterns in one session. Okay, this can be kind of twofold. When we're doing individual lesson pattern practice, you kind of teach one pattern at a time. But if we say to them that they're doing a lesson on shun, T-I-O-N, then obviously they're going to be prepared to answer or spell every word with that T-I-O-N ending. When it comes time to do the actual SATs, they won't have that guidance. So if you're looking at those shun endings, mix them up a bit. Yeah, make sure that they're all mixed up in one lesson, so they're not sure which ending they're going to be using, whether it's T-I-O-N, C-I-A-N, S-I-O-N. So for example, mission, so they can think about what other solutions, what other strategies they've got in order to help them with their spelling. It can also link with the words Amelia was saying about using a couple of patterns for one word, like replacing, using prefixes and suffixes. So if you do lessons where you're mixing them up and looking at a couple of different patterns, you can think about what patterns are being used, or prefixes, suffixes for each word. And our final one, tip 7, is to take handwriting on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so if they have really clear handwriting and it's cursive, don't try and change it into a print style just to make it that bit clearer. If it's clear enough, leave it alone. Don't try and drastically change it now. Obviously, if they're writing in cursive, but you can't tell what some of the letters are, then you might want to train them in order to do some of them print or make it clearer using a print method. Okay, so do it as a case-by-case basis. Don't feel like you need to have the whole class writing in the same way, in the same style, because it isn't applicable in the test. As long as it's clear enough, then that's fine.
Okay, so if you have not got access to the Spelling Shed resources, you can get a free 30-day free trial by signing up at edshed.com. If you want any help with anything, you can always email support@edshed.com or training@edshed.com. You can have a look at all our resources and use them to get some prep in for your SATs. And if you are interested in any training, you can find all of this on our website. Similar to where you find webinars, you go to the top bar and you click training instead. This webinar has been recorded, so it will be available on our webinars page afterwards. So if you want to tell other people in your school about it and then come and watch it at another point, you can find that on that tab at the top as well. Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll hang around a couple of minutes to see if anybody's got any questions. Please feel free to type them in the chat box, and thank you.